Welcome to the Destinations podcast. Today, I'm so thrilled that we're taping at the Elizabeth Hotel in Fort Collins, Colorado. It is a Marriott signature hotel, part of their autograph collection, and absolutely beautiful. We're in the Ram Suite today, and you will enjoy the beautiful colors from my alma mater, Colorado State University. That was the inspiration for the suite. So enjoy the taping, and we look forward to seeing you again. Stop in to the Elizabeth Hotel when you're in Fort Collins. Welcome to another edition of the Destinations podcast. I'm your host, Doni Aldine, and today I'm excited. She's been here with us before when we did season 1, Negra Como Soy, and she's back today to give more information and really go in depth on identity. And that guest is Dr. Paulette Bethel. So I'm going to read you her bio because you already know her. You've been introduced to her. I talk about her quite a bit, but we're going to tell you exactly what Dr. Paulette does. So Dr. Paulette Bethel, CMC, CTRC, we'll have to ask her what those letters mean. It's all that sciencey, fancy, smanchy stuff. Is the founder of Discoveries Coaching and specializes in relationship betrayal and identity trauma. She offers expertise on topics including race, in-betweener identity, which of course you know cultures is all about, in-between identity, multiculturalism, and transition impacts. She's the creator of the acclaimed Not Parent Expected NPE Identity Disruption Trauma Model, which is being used quite widely now. I can't wait to start talking about that. She has led the way in grief and trauma recovery from unexpected DNA surprises. So as you know, this season with the Destinations podcast, we've talked about destination identity quite a bit and disruptions that come from DNA findings that people are really noticing. I look forward to talking to Dr. Paulette about cultural findings that happen or surprises that happen with some of these DNA findings. She's drawing from her diverse background as a former nonprofit CEO, retired U.S. Air Force officer, TCK trauma recovery expert, and Weisenberg Fellow. And she brings a unique perspective to her work. You'll find out why if you don't already know from our other episodes. Dr. Paulette is a cultures columnist. Thank you for Bella's Front Porch. We'll also find out where that title comes from for her column, and has appeared in national and international media. When not helping others, she enjoys time with her husband, Ralph, her adult TCK children, her 8 grandchildren, and their chosen home from everywhere they've been in the world. Houston, Texas, people. Houston, Texas. She tried to get me to go there too, and I really thought about it, but I couldn't do it. So welcome, Dr. Paulette Bethel. Hi, Dr. Paulette.
It's great to be here in Paulette for you and me. How about that?
I know. I call you Dr. Paulette with everybody. I don't know. I just like
yeah.
It's my thing. Mm-hmm. But how are you? You traveled to be here today, too, from Houston. Yes, and you look lovely in this gold color. We were talking
in
about
honor of your alma mater. How about that?
Yes, right? Who knew, right? All the green and gold. I have a little green and gold going on. It's not quite the right green, but still good, So I am looking forward to speaking to you about identity disruption today. So tell us a little bit, I read your bio and people have met you before, but tell us your background so they really get the foundation of who you are.
Okay. Let's start with, I'm a native of New Orleans, which is kind of what brought me into your world in many ways, right? Yes. And we can talk about that a little bit. Grew up in this really culturally flowing, diverse kind of environment. I didn't really appreciate it because it was just part of my normal. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really appreciate what that meant for me coming from a culture that was so vibrant and had so much going on. So that's a little bit about where I'm from. So what would you like to know?
Yes, but then you joined the Air Force.
Okay, let's do it.
Air
Yes,
Force.
I did.
And well, first of all, you went from the culture of New Orleans. So we probably should talk a little bit of the culture of New Orleans,
Right.
because that was the foundation that really was the springboard to all of this.
All the other stuff.
Yes.
So for as long as I can remember being me, we're talking about my column, but as long as I can remember being me, I really was fascinated with travel and adventure and culture. But it never occurred to me that I would grow up one day to join the Air Force. I always kind of knew I wanted to have an adventurous life, right? And then life stuff happened. I went through a pretty rocky divorce. And at the time, the economy was really bad and jobs were just kind of not out there and available. And then someone let me know that the military was hiring. So that's the beginning of my story. And so I did apply and attended OTS, and then the rest became history.
Which is officer training school.
Officer training school. What they used to call us the 90-day wonders.
Because you already had your degree. And
I already had my degree. I already had a degree, and so I applied for officer training school and was accepted. I think the year that I was accepted, I was only one of 4 people accepted into officer training school from New Orleans, and then I'm the only one that successfully graduated. So that's a little bit of my...
Oh, really?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
It's a pretty tough program.
Wow,
right?
wow.
But at the same time, going through that program really taught me about the stuff that I was made of. Because at the time, they were just really integrating women into the line side of the military. There weren't that many women. There weren't that many people of color when we were there. So there were those added layers of challenge for me, just because OTS is a really tough environment to get through under the best of circumstances. But I also did it as a person of color and as a woman. But by the end of the program, I really did rise to the occasion. And there were times, at one point, I wanted to quit. And there was this thing called the self-initiated elimination process. And I remember going to my commander and saying, "Sir, respectfully wish to SIE." And he said, "No."
No.
And I went, "But I have a right to SIE." And he went, "You have a right to SIE, sir." Oh, okay. "Sir, I respectfully request SIE." And he said, "I respectfully am telling you, no, get out of my office." I didn't understand at the time that he saw that stuff and he did not want me to give up. And I remember I had friends outside the door waiting and listening, and they said, "What happened in there?" And I said, "He told me no." And they said, "He can't tell you no." And I said, "He just threw me out." I am so grateful to this day. And then, and at the end of it, he told me, he said, "When you were struggling at one point, I could still see you had exactly what we look for in our officers." So, thank you for that.
Nice.
Right, that was really nice.
So you went to officer training school, came out, you had a stellar career in the Air Force, but along the way traveled, you met your husband, Ralph.
I met my husband. We were both stationed in the Republic of the Philippines.
Right.
And we were both single parents.
Yes.
Right.
And now you expanded your family of 2, you and your son, to 5, right? When the
Right.
2 of you
Well, it
got
was me
married.
and my daughter, and then his
excuse me,
son.
you and your daughter.
Me and my daughter, and then his son and daughter,
yes.
and then
I don't separate the two, because this family is so great. When they connected, they were just a family. It wasn't your son and your daughter and my daughter, which I'm sorry, I do know you have a daughter, but their son as well. I mean, they just melded as a family and they were one. And so these kids were true TCKs.
They were true TCKs.
They were very multicultural already. His kids were African American, and he's got a mixture with him, but then also his wife was,
and then his wife was from Thailand.
Right. And then your daughter, whose father was African American, and then you have a mixture as well. Right. And then they are now traveling the world with their Air Force parents.
Right.
So they're Air Force brats. They grew up not just in the Philippines, but where else?
So they grew up Thailand, the Philippines. and then multiple places around the U.S.
Wow.
And then my youngest, when I did a doctoral internship in China, near Guangzhou, China, he was a part of that experience.
Wow.
And so lots of memories for him with it.
Wow, fantastic. And for me, all of that is just wonderful for shaping identity and really understanding who you are as a person, as an individual. But we have the tools for that today. When I was younger and when your kids were younger, not everybody understood that made a huge difference in how you would be accepted, how you'd view yourself, how other people view you, especially as people of color. Right? So you went from that and fast forward to a stellar career, got your PhD, all the things, and then you ended up in Hawaii and career-wise.
I ended up in Hawaii because my husband got a job in Hawaii, and I went for the vacation and the fun, right? And I got a call one day from someone from his organization that said, a little bird told me that you decided to move here with your husband. And I said, that little bird is right. And he said, well, it just so happens I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and they've been looking for a CEO for over a year, and I know you have just the qualifications that they're looking for. May I give them your name? And as you and I know in our discussions, it turned out to be a wonderful experience for me.
Right. So it's really interesting. This season is really about entrepreneurship, but we've been talking a lot about Not Parent Expected, which you're part of the NPE Network, and I am as well. And I mean, my parent is expected, but I'm part of that network because we really believe in the work that's being done there. And in Hawaii, you got to work with adoptees.
Got to work with children and family in the foster care system, which in some cases the kids did transition into adoptive families. And when they were transitioned, we would also serve as the liaison, the link between that transition of going from being in the foster care system. And actually, we're there on the beginning ends when they would enter the foster care system. We didn't remove children. We were just there to be that safety net, that support system to support them and the foster families that were taking care of them until some other permanent kind of placement came, whether it's returning them to their families safely or working with different agencies to help them get adopted into a new family.
Well, what was great about that for me when you were going through those transitions and doing that work, I'd spoken on another episode with Rebecca Drumsta about entrepreneurship within that area, about nonprofits and the entrepreneurial similarities there, right? But also here with TCKs, the intersections and the commonalities that we saw in the work you were
within the work we were
there.
doing. You and I would make those connections between me observing those kids navigating multiple worlds. I think I shared a story with you one day when I asked one of my staff members who had been in the foster care system, could she share with me, because I wasn't, in the foster system. So I asked her, can you share with me a little about what that was like for you and then coming into the work? And what she started sharing, she was aware that I was, very much into the TCK world, so she had that awareness. But what she ended up saying, she said, when I was growing up, I moved foster care homes 16 times.
Wow.
And every time I moved to a new home, I had to learn a new culture within that family. Right. So, in one family, they're Catholic, another family, they're Protestant, another family, they don't practice religion. I had to navigate my way through different holidays being celebrated in different ways. And so in some ways, she found that helped her, as we know with the TCK population, to be more flexible and adaptive. Right. But it also came with its challenges because she had to deal with the goodbyes, the disruptions. Right. Just about the time she'd be getting settled with a family she really liked, it would be time for her to move on. And so there were a lot of the gifts and challenges are very similar, except they're not doing international travel. Right. They're just moving.
But the mobility, that's the
part.
key with TCKs and also with domestic TCKs, and we're now seeing that within family units, right?
Right.
And in the episode with Rebecca, we also talked about cults and how that could be a family unit can actually be a cult. So that travel and that mobility can be from family to family.
Family to family, or like in the case of with Rebecca, or the kids in the foster care system, military kids, TCKs all around. they're navigating between their home system, their religious system, and then there's the outer world. So, you're going to the outer world and you don't really fit or connect. This is what was happening with the kids I worked with in Hawaii. And I began to really appreciate how much my having done work in the TCK world benefited me in my capacity. As the CEO, and I'm going to do a plug for Family Programs Hawaii, which is a wonderful, wonderful foster caring program. And then while I was there, we did take on an entrepreneurial venture that is still doing very well.
Oh, what was that?
Part of the nonprofit. We ended up opening up a family strengthening center where families could come to one of our locations and receive services with therapists and other social workers to help them with things that they may have been going through from a mental health perspective.
Wow, nice.
Right.
That is really the thread with this season. It's the entrepreneurialism. Mental health has come up so much. And we talk about identity. You really can't pull that away from the mental aspects of who we are. And the mental health challenges, or I guess even gifts that may come from that. It's so important these days. Well, so you did all that. Right?
Right.
And then
decided to retire.
Yes.
Retire.
And all of that journey got you to the work that you do now in identity disruption. And how did you get to this?
Okay. So, as you brought up earlier, it's early 2018, I decided that I wanted to do the ancestry DNA test because I'd heard all of these stories about all of my cultural, and it always used to be called the melting pot culture. I'm not big on melting pot anymore, but it was a melting pot culture because it consisted of so many people from so many different backgrounds and cultures and races that I would hear all these stories about my own racial ethnic background. And I decided I want to find out how true some of those family stories that were passed down were true. It's things like my mother would say that her great-grandmother was half Ethiopian and half French. And then I would say, well, how do you know that? And she would say, well, it's what the old people said, right? So at one point I said, well, I want to find out if the old people were right, kind of thing. My other great-grandmother would tell me she was part Portuguese and French and African. And so I wanted to find out, well, are we really Portuguese? That's the stories they tell me, right? And that was my great-grandmother, Bella, right?
Bella's front porch.
Bella's front porch. And so I decided to take the ancestry DNA test to find out. Well, the good news is I discovered, at least the way that the algorithms are going now, based upon the current algorithms and how they match up against the DNA database, I am 17 ethnicities and hail from Asia, Africa, Europe, the Philippines, and China. Wow, right? So that part was like, okay, all these stories about all of this melting pot culture, genetically, there's some truth to it, and but then the tough part of it was I had recently received a call from one of my cousins who had taken the test, and she was sharing with me what the test said was our indigenous Native American background. And I remember when she told me, I thought it was, I'm not really getting why you're telling me this because we would have already known this. But she explained to me why she had done it. And so then I said, well, I have the test. I'll go on and take the test too. Okay. And she had shared with me that her test results were showing that she was 33% indigenous Native American, right? Our grandfather was from Mexico, and our grandmother was half Native American. Right. And I got my test results and I'm really excited. And I open up the test results and my eyes travel first to the upper right-hand corner where it says percentage of Native American indigenous ancestry. And mine said 0. And when I looked at that, I'm shocked. I'm like, that can't be. Right. And then I started rationalizing. I'm like, okay, so maybe I'm not 33%, maybe I'm 30%, I'm 25%. And then I went, heck, how about 15%, but 0? And then my eyes traveled over to the maps where they circle where your ancestry backgrounds were from. and Mexico was not circled. All right. And now it's...
I mean, we've talked about this before, but as you tell the story, I feel the blow, man, the blow of that, because at the time, your name was Paulette Martinez Bethel, and you had been Martinez your
my whole
life.
Right.
Right?
Right. And as you and I have discussed, and all the identity that went with that. May I tell the story about when we did the last podcast
Yes,
with the title?
Of course.
So Donnie had wanted to interview me about this. We had talked about it, and she wanted to name the podcast episode "No Longer Latina," and I'm arguing with her about why she should pick another. Remember that I was like, no, pick another, and you said no, and it was such a gift to me because I think part of it is it really allowed me to really grieve into that loss, right? Once, and part of it was in the interview, you got me to talk about that part of my identity disruption, right? And so, but yeah, I woke up one day and that it was like that Latina had been blown up.
I couldn't even, and I said this in that podcast too, I couldn't imagine if I woke up and somebody told me I was not Costa Rican or not Trinidadian, any of it. I don't know what I would do. It's such a huge part of my identity. Yeah.
And you recognize that and you caught that.
Yeah.
And I think I was so busy being in disbelief and shock. There was a part of me that recognized what does it mean to no longer be a Martinez, right? And at the same time, I think I was dealing with so many different emotions. That was one that I kind of blocked and set aside until we had that conversation.
Until I made you look at it. That's why I said I'm sorry.
But, it's like, yep, you're no longer Latina. Right. And it was a little difficult for me because, as you know, in the American culture, with the old rules about one drop black blood, I had been acculturated as black.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And so I really didn't put a lot of stock in what that other part of myself meant to me. Wow. But you recognize it almost from when we first met.
Yes.
Right.
And that's partly because of my identity too, because when people look at me, just like what you're saying about the one drop, all they see is African American. Well, I'm neither.
Right.
I'm black, but I'm Trinidadian Costa Rican. And so that's important to me. I make sure people understand it, and I don't care what your thoughts are about it. This is who I am. Right. And so it was very clear to me that would be something that's devastating, whether it was on the surface or not. Right.
But anyhow, how I got into this work is, initially I was just absolutely, totally devastated with my discovery. What do you mean? I'm not who I thought I was. My dad's not my dad. Oh my God. And then I tried to tell people that I knew, and they were kind of looking at me like, I don't understand. What's the big deal? Yet here I am.
That was the hard part, that so many people couldn't understand the identity disruption of
that
it,
happened.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening, I think, and that kind of continued you on this path.
Right, and that's what got me started on the path is I was so devastated and I didn't know where to turn because the people I knew didn't get why I was devastated like I was. And so I would find myself up at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning trying to find anything about, I was putting like DNA surprise, DNA discoveries. Now, what was really interesting is I came up with the name of my company while I was still in Hawaii with no discovery. But one day it came to me, name your new coaching company, Discoveries Coaching, right? So that just kind of always fascinates me. But so I'm up in the middle of the night after night, trying to find something to support me, to help me. And I'm going, I am a former licensed marriage and family therapist, and all of that training is not helping me right now, right? I'm devastated. And so I had been taking a trauma recovery training course as a coach, and so one night I remembered that the founder of that company had shown us a trauma recovery model that she had developed, and I pulled it out, and I was looking at her model. And then it dawned on me, my identity has been disrupted. It's just been totally disrupted. And then I started poking holes at her model, right? And And then the next day I called her and I said, can you take a look at what I've done? And that was the creation of my trauma recovery model, where I actually deal with that discovery, especially if you've had no idea like me. I'd never had any reason to question my identity in that sense, right?
Okay.
And that I recognized with that discovery, and mine was in about 30 seconds, right? That's shattering, to have your identity blown up within about 30 seconds. I started recognizing my identity has been disrupted, and then I started trying to look for identity disruption, and I didn't see anything,
Nothing, yeah.
right? And so then it's like I created the NPE Friends Fellowship. Now the NPE Network came into being, where one night I came across the fellowship, and then I saw that they were planning a retreat, right, for NPEs. And so at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I texted Rebecca Dumpster and said, hi, I'm Paulette Bethel, and I would love to present at your conference because I have this concept I would like to share that I had developed, right? And then there's history in the story. I actually prefer when Rebecca tells the story. But so the rest of that part is history. We made connections and contacts. They did agree to let me come on as a speaker. And that's when I knew this is where I'm supposed to be, right? And I came out of retirement, and I've been working with the network and having my own coaching practice ever since, where I'm working with NPEs.
So before I forget, tell us what the letters behind your name stand for.
Oh, okay. So my original coaching designation is a certified master coach, and that was in executive and business coaching. As you may recall, for a while I was doing business coaching,
Yes.
right? And then, having no idea that this was going to happen to me, because of the work I had done with Family Programs Hawaii and watching how children going through the foster care system were being impacted by trauma. And up until that point, even though I had been a therapist, my training wasn't steeped in trauma, right? My training was steeped in systems and family systems and working with families in a systems kind of way. So I had surgery. And during my recovery, I decided to take my first trauma recovery coach training. And it was right in the middle of that training that I made my discovery. So the CTRC is a certified trauma recovery coach, and I'm an advanced trauma recovery coach now.
Right. And I thought it was important that people knew what those letters stood for and the background that goes with that, because you're weaving journey to where you are now, plus your education, really brings such experience and such, whether it's educational experience or lived experience, to the work that you do now. Even what was steeped in family counseling, right?
Family counseling, right?
That all comes together to work with identity disruption for individuals, and how it affects the family.
It affects all of us. And then if you think about it, I'm recognizing that a lot of the work that we've done, when I was really steeped in working in the TCK world, is very often we were dealing with what was happening with all of the multiple moves and the multiple transitions and going into different cultures and different environments, whether it was from one U.S. state to another U.S. state, from one Latin American country to another Latin American country, overseas. I remember a gentleman saying he was a military brat and his parents moved him from California to Georgia. He was like, talk about culture shock.
Yeah.
But when with all those transitions and things I didn't understand about my own kids, right? Because nobody told me your kids are being disrupted. Right. There are all these beautiful benefits to that lifestyle, but at the same time, every time we made a move, their sense of self was being impacted. They had to learn new rules. They get to new places. They didn't know the rules, and now their identity was being disrupted. But I'm only recently making the connection between developing this concept for the world of not parent expected, but I'm recognizing in family betrayals, there's identity disruption, in the transitions for TCKs when they were growing up. Right? And even in my own growing up in my culturally fluid hometown is I was a child of integration. So I went through integration in high school. And, it was like going from one rural milieu that I had been in, which was a subculture of a culture, because remember, I grew up under the identity of a Louisiana Creole.
Right.
Right, you hear Beyonce talk about it. And that was a culture within itself that didn't necessarily match the broader African American culture.
Right.
We had our own rules and mores and things and practices that were really more Latin American, which, you and I have had a lot of conversations about. And so if I left my little Creole culture and then I would go into the larger African American culture, I'm transitioning to that. And then I went through integration, and that was yet another culture. And I was transiting these cultures every day.
Daily, yes.
Daily.
Yeah.
Daily,
Yeah.
right.
Wow. Well, the work that you do now with identity disruption, I mean, it's amazing to me, from TCKs to adoptees and families to NPEs. It's all so relevant.
Right.
And it makes me wonder if there's a bigger, like a larger scope that speaks to all of it, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to do here at Cultures, is really bring all that together, bring it to light, so that people can find other people who are like them, right? It's not about being told you're this way, you are this person, you are this identity. It's about how you identify and understanding yourself and the things that have made you who you are.
Makes me who I am. And also, from the genetics perspective, I've now met my new family. I didn't meet my biological father because he had already passed. My mother had already passed, but I'm now in a relationship with some of my siblings and some of my older relatives. And the nature part, I am so much like that family that it's just been amazing to see myself through their eyes and through their lenses. And not everybody has that story, but for me, when I'm around them, it's like there's parts of me that makes more sense now. There were times when things didn't make sense to me. I always knew with my siblings I was their half sibling, right? But yet we were all aware I was different, but we thought, well, she's different because she's a Martinez. But then when I would go around the Martinezes, I never quite felt like I fit there either, right? And so when I look back at now, I have core personality traits genetically that were showing up the entire time. And now I marvel because my stepdad molded all of those traits.
Interesting.
That's a bigger picture piece for me.
Interesting. I think, and even with all this trauma, with all this change, with all these unexpected things, I feel like you've had such a blessed life with such rich family ties. And, when we talk about your marriage and your kids or your stepdad, like so much love. And really that's what it's about. People being understanding. You think about, no matter the culture, because I've seen it happen in so many cultures, how society has told us we need to be a certain way, act a certain way, have this certain polish, don't tell these secrets, and how that has affected individuals and families along the way, right? And when people, I think, accept others for who they are, that's when the beauty starts to come out.
That's when the humanity begins to happen. And I think that's one of the gifts that can come from this. I am determined that I'm going to be part of that message getting out that says that family secrets are not healthy. They can be very destructive, right? And with the DNA tests becoming more and more popular, more and more people are going to be making these discoveries. Right? And so I'm passionate about being part of the NPE Network so that I can be part of helping to spread that word and provide resources. I do also work with clients privately that will contact me for one-to-one coaching services. And I'm also currently, through the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches, teaching a course that's in collaboration with the NPE Network for therapists and trauma recovery coaches who want to be able to be more informed or specialized in working with this population.
Well, that's really important because, as we know through TCK work and also for people of color, your therapist really needs to understand who you are at your core, right? And have details about your background and your culture, because Otherwise, the understanding has to be there in order to advise you.
Right. It has to be there. And coaches and therapists that are working with people, any professional helping people, also, I think, really need to understand why the NPE experience is the complex trauma. It's got so many layers and layers and layers of complexity, and that it really is a big T trauma. And a lot of times we hear the stories. I hear the stories from my clients. I hear the stories within the network in our Facebook group that people go see therapists, and therapists don't get it. Doctors don't get it. Lots of people. I remember the first time after my discovery, I had a doctor's appointment with a new doctor. So we were doing the family history thing. And he said, let's start with your mother, which was great. And I, said everything I had to say. And then he said, okay, now let's do your father's side. And he ended up with this crumpled up mess in his office, right? Just crying my eyes out because I didn't have answers, right? But in his particular case, he had his thing and he set it down and he looked at me and he said, I don't think I've ever had someone present with this in my office before. And then he stopped. He said, but I probably have, but if they didn't tell me, I wasn't paying attention. And he moved over and he said, how can I help you? Right? And it was really healing because even though he didn't have that experience, he wasn't a trauma recovery expert, but that he really got it that my losing my medical history was in and of itself a trauma, right? When I can't tell you what that I have my genetic history now because I did find out who my family was, but I think it's really important for professionals around the world. And I'll be honest, someone coming from the military, I can't tell you how many times I look in the Facebook group and it was somebody that grew up in a military family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So.
Wow. Well, I think all of that work is going to make such a difference. I think all of the work of the NPE Network, work of individuals like you and individuals that support those organizations are going to make a difference it's in the tens of thousands now, but it's going to. And we talked about also the impact per person, how many people are impacted for each individual impacted. But the individuals impacted, I think those numbers are just going to grow.
Growing and growing. There are different numbers. Rebecca could probably give you a more accurate number than I can, but we have well over 10,000 people just in our Facebook group. That doesn't count the other groups, but it could be up in the millions. And then to your point about the individual, family dynamics, ripple effect, it's not just us. Yeah. It ripples all the way out through.
I think Rebecca said 50 people per. Is that correct? I'm going to look off camera. Is it 50? 50 people per person are affected. Whether in the family unit, people you work with, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, whether it's the individual, it's the family. And, and the other part, for example, when I first made my discovery, I was so internalized to my own pain that it didn't occur to me, how are my children being affected? How are my siblings being affected? How are my new siblings being affected? And then once I had that aha moment, then it was that it's not just me. Of course, it's directly me, and that's really painful because my identity has been disrupted. I'm feeling betrayed by the family secret that was kept from me. Right? And I want to make clear that's not me being angry with my mother, or seeing her as someone that's not worthy, but it's like, Mom, how could you have not told me that kind of thing? But then when I looked around and I realized my siblings that I grew up with are hurting, my children are hurting. When I told my kids, they were like, well, who are we now? Right? So that disruption has a ripple effect throughout the system. And if you talk to a lot of people, friendships change. So now you've got another loss because your friends kind of disappear because I suspect they don't really know how to help you or what to say. Right. So with the kids, they block you now. I've had quite a few clients where the friends just kind of don't show up anymore.
Interesting.
So that's just another aspect of it.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Wow, there's so much to explore. and I'm sure we'll talk again as your work continues. Is there anything that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about?
No, other than tune in for my Bella's Front Porch.
Yes. I mean, well, so I mentioned it. I said the name, and then I made the connection, or said the connection to Bella's Front Porch. But let's talk a little bit about what you talk about in Bella's Front Porch, which is her column in Cultures Magazine.
Well, as you and I initially agreed, you said you'll have a column where you get to talk about anything and everything that you want to talk about as it relates to race, identity, and culture.
Yeah.
And so it's a column where I have, dialogues and conversation and information sharing. I have done an article on the NPE experience. I did it both through my own personal lens plus interviewing someone who had a major racial change. And as you remember, but just I do topics on like my New Orleans culture. I do topics on disenfranchised grief, which is another one that impacts quite a few people. But I love the freedom and flexibility. And as when we talked about it, when it first became where you made the suggestion, my great grandmother's front porch, where the community would come together and they would have conversations where they would solve all the problems in the world.
Yeah.
They would talk, they would connect, they would support, they would cry, they would shout, they would scream. And this was a milieu as part of my childhood. And I loved, no big surprise I became a therapist because I love kind of sitting in the corner of the porch and listening to all of the stories and all of the history and community coming together. My great grandmother was very much the matriarch of her community, and so it became like that gathering place for people to come to get connection, friendship, support, understanding, help.
And now you're that gathering place for a lot of TCKs, NPEs, anyone with
identity issues,
Yep.
multiracial people, in
Yep.
between people.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's a marriage made in heaven.
Okay.
So thank you.
All right, thank
I
you
will
for
not say
having me.
Dr. Paulette. I'll just say thank you, Paulette.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Okay.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of the Destination Podcast with me, Doni Aldine. I hope that you found something really, really helpful in this episode that helps you connect with who you are and the people around you, and that it helps you live in full color.